EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. In the mainland United States, typical conversations about Hawaii are more likely to center on dream vacations than teacher shortages. But there's plenty to be learned from the state's educational challenges, as today's guest will demonstrate. Suevon Lee covers Hawaii's public schools for Honolulu Civil Beat, and she joins us now. Suevon, welcome to EWA Radio.
Thanks so much, Emily.
It's great to hear you. How can I not ask? What's the weather today?
Well, funny you should ask. It's actually kind of cold and rainy.
You're just saying that to make us all feel better.
Yes, I have to say this is rare, but we do have days like this from time to time. So it's not all sunshine.
Let's go ahead and set the stage for our listeners who may not know a lot about Hawaii. I mean, one thing that's unique about it, it's the only state in the nation where there's one school system. It's the Department of Education overseeing every campus and every student. Lay the scene for us. Tell us what that looks like.
That's right. It is the only state in the country that operates as a single school district. So it's not carved up into multiple school districts like most other places in the country. So what that means is that there's one central administration that's kind of overseeing the entire system. So there's one superintendent, and she has her team, her core team. However, the state is divided up into 15 different complex areas throughout the state. And what that means is there's one high school in that complex area and all the feeder schools that feed into it. So an elementary school and the middle schools that go into that high school. And those 15 areas are then overseen by complex area superintendents. So they do have some management over those geographic areas. But in general, the school system is run as a single district. It's also not funded through property taxes like many other school districts around the country. So it's primarily funded through state general funds.
I can imagine that having one administrative food chain, if you will, might have some benefits for a reporter in terms of trying to figure out who you go to when you have a particular question. But I'm wondering, does that also present some challenges?
Yeah, that's interesting you should ask. So I have to be honest, this is the first school system I've ever covered as a reporter. So I don't have as much point of comparison with other school systems in terms of coverage. But having been a reporter on this beat now for almost 3 years in Hawaii, I do find that when I do need to turn to, for instance, an official statement from the Hawaii Department of Education, there is one communications office, central office, that I would turn to get a comment. When there are certain areas of the state I want to focus in on, I tend to go straight to that area, whether it's a school, whether it's that complex area superintendent that I had mentioned previously. So I'll try and kind of narrow in on that. But when it comes to sort of messaging and publicity and marketing from the Hawaii Department of Education standpoint, it is coming down from that one central office. So as far as the challenges that presents, of course, I think that that message is a little bit more tightly controlled due to that system. And as a reporter, though, it does give me a little bit more free rein as far as not having to focus in on this one school district or that school district. But I tend to try and go where interesting conversations or innovative programs might be happening. So as a reporter, I try and cover sort of more of a variety of geographic areas. For those unfamiliar with sort of Hawaii's geography, it is an archipelago of 8 major islands. The most populous being Oahu, which is where Honolulu is located and which is where I'm based. So while the majority of our schools are concentrated on Oahu, there are other islands that have plenty of public school kids, including the Big Island, Maui, Kauai, for instance. So I guess my challenge as a reporter is trying to find out what's happening not just on Oahu, but those other remote areas.
What are some of Hawaii's biggest challenges in attracting qualified teachers?
We know that many states are experiencing teacher shortages and that this is not unique to this state. However, the way that Hawaii is situated and its incredibly high cost of living presents particular challenges in this area. So Hawaii's teacher workforce is about 13,700 strong. The school system encompasses about 256 public schools statewide, including 36 public charter schools, and it services about 179,000 students. So it's quite large. It's about the 10th largest school system in the country. So, anyhow, the challenge of finding qualified teachers to come work here, and not only to come here, but to stay here beyond several years, is something that the DOE is really focusing on.
In your reporting, you've included a lot of teachers' voices talking about the challenges they face in working in Hawaii, and they've shared experiences like working second or even third jobs, using vacation days for parental leave. Give us an idea of what some of the biggest challenges are for teachers right now.
Right. So the Hawaii DOE recently held a series of listening sessions around the islands back in September to get teacher feedback on what some of the biggest challenges for them were. And you're absolutely right. It's this cost of living issue. So while Hawaii's median teacher salary is, a little bit higher than average, I believe it's around $65,000 a year. It's the cost of living that really sort of diminishes that purchasing power of that salary. So, what teachers were saying at these listening sessions was that they often had to take second jobs. They may have to work for a rideshare company or wait tables to supplement their income. They can't afford a place of their own. So, if they're renting, they might have to room with roommates, or they can't buy a home if they have a family just because it's super expensive in Hawaii. A lot of teachers also mention student loan debt, the fact that their health benefits and their medical bills may also be high with their income in mind. Just cost of living issues that really do sort of seep into their ability to maintain a quality, stable lifestyle. And this really was contributing to the attrition problem among the teacher workforce. So recently, Hawaii came out with a pay adequacy study just a couple days ago in which they were comparing sort of Hawaii's pay compared to other similarly high cost of living school districts around the country. So that was pretty eye opening in terms of how much less Hawaii teachers are getting paid in relation to those contexts.
Well, certainly, the cost of living is a huge factor here. And what do we know about the teachers? How many of them are coming from local state colleges and universities versus moving to Hawaii to take this job and then just sort of being stunned at the reality of what it costs to work there?
So, what we know is about a third, one third of Hawaii's teachers are kind of coming from in state, but quite a few are coming from the mainland. Hawaii hires about 1,000 new teachers each year, but then again, about 1,000 teachers leave. So, on net, it's pretty even. The DOE does a lot of mainland recruitment trips. They rely upon the mainland to find a lot of its new teachers. So every year they go to places like, Washington State, Oregon, California, Texas, as far away as Pennsylvania, New York, to find new teachers. This pay adequacy study that just came out a couple days ago actually indicates a little bit more of a specific breakdown. And according to that study, it looks like California provides about 12% of the new to Hawaii teachers. About another 5% came from Texas in 2018-19 school year, and 2% from Florida. So it's really all over the map. One thing that Hawaii is focusing on is trying to grow its own teachers. I know this is sort of a very big push around the country for many other states, but here in particular, there's a really interesting dynamic of teachers who are from Hawaii and are local to Hawaii who understand sort of the culture and the way that this place works. And that does develop stronger connections with students. As part of my reporting project for the Help Wanted series that I did for EWA's fellowship last year, one of my stories focused on that cultural component and what it means for teachers who are not from Hawaii. How do they develop and cultivate a relationship with their students? It's quite challenging, especially due to the diversity of Hawaii's student population. Not only does it have quite a large Native Hawaiian student population, but a lot of students coming from other places in the Pacific Islands, such as Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, those places. It really does kind of take a level of cultural understanding and competency to relate to the students. And that's one thing I think Hawaii is working on in terms of growing its own teachers.
Well, it's fascinating because what you're talking about is backed up by the research. As you've reported, we know that when students have teachers who look like them in many different ways, whether it's race or gender, particularly if they're already facing challenges in their classrooms and their home lives, they do better academically. But trying to find those teachers who sort of fit that formula is challenging in many circumstances, but especially when you're talking about a native population that is as small as Hawaii's is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not as if a lot of residents who grew up here don't necessarily want to go into teaching. I think there's just a lot of considerations. A big social issue right now is out migration. A lot of families who grew up here and were raised here, they can no longer afford to live here. Hawaii's cost of living is just so exorbitant and it's only grown. I know in the last, up to several decades that people are leaving more than they're coming in. So that's creating this issue of available folks to really come and teach in the classrooms. Now, I know that the DOE is trying to address the pay issue by asking the state legislature for more funding when it comes to hard to staff positions such as special education and Hawaiian language immersion and remote, geographically isolated teaching positions. They're also asking for more pay to pay veteran teachers more. So, those teachers who have up to 10 years of experience and more to convince them to stay and not leave. So, we'll see if those proposals will eventually be funded by the state ledge. They're in session right now and it wraps up in May. But, these are the conversations that are taking place. As a reporter, based upon my conversations with teachers and parents and community members, just having that connection to your students does go a long way. And you're absolutely right, Emily, in that does, I think, contribute to a student's long-term academic success if they trust their teacher. And I think trust and that familiarity comes with longevity in the classroom, but also looking like them, knowing their customs, knowing a lot about Hawaii, knowing about how this place operates. Just this incredible racial complexity makes it a really fascinating place to be a reporter and to be a resident. I personally am not from Hawaii. I moved here from the mainland 3 years ago, so I'm still learning. And I think the more kinds of people and students and families I talk to, the more I'm learning about how important the social emotional learning component is crucial to students' growth and development here.
We're talking with Suevon Lee of Honolulu Civil Beat about her coverage of the state's teacher shortages. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And thank you to everyone who's taken a moment to rate us on iTunes. Your support and feedback are helping us grow. We mentioned that Suevon is an EWA Reporting Fellow. We also want to mention that she retained all editorial control over her project, which was called Help Wanted. Suevon, when you decided to lay out a project of this scale, where did you start? How do you tackle something like this?
Right. It was a large issue to tackle. I knew that I wanted to focus generally on the topic of teacher recruitment and retention in Hawaii. That's one of the superintendent's main initiatives. She herself is fairly new. She came and started her position in 2017. So this was one of her main priority areas. In addition, I knew that this was an important topic because of my conversations with people just on the beat. So, how to tackle something as big as this is, first of all, I knew I wanted there to be a data component. So, working with our data reporting fellow at the time, Carly Procell, we decided to create just a spreadsheet of all of the schools in the state and allowing people to use sort of an interactive database to plug in their school and see how many of those teachers were uncertified or how many of them are staying 5 years or more. So the first story, the kickoff to this series, was featuring some of those interactive graphs. I also knew that I wanted to sort of key in on the main challenges, such as lack of teacher housing, the cultural gaps. So, my strategy was really to follow teachers and have those be my guides and then branch out from there. So, as an example, I know that the Hawaii DOE and University of Hawaii system had recently embarked on a pilot project called the Grow Our Own Teacher Initiative. And what that is giving teachers subsidies to attend classes for free in order to get their teachers' licenses. So this is geared towards long-term subs and educational assistants. And through that program, I found the first cohort of students and I wanted to really follow them through their journey. So, through that program, I found one young teacher on the Big Island who came to Hawaii about 6, 7 years ago, not as a teacher, but to work in the nonprofit sector. But she began subbing as a science teacher over on the Big Island. And she just fell in love doing that she wanted to become a certified teacher. So I talked to her over the phone first. She agreed to allow me and our multimedia producer to come to the Big Island and shadow her for a day. So her journey is really featured prominently in one of my stories for the Help Wanted series. And through her, I just, got to meet other teachers at that middle school that she was teaching at the time. I spoke to that principal and it really branched out from there. I guess it's one thing I learned as an education reporter is that, we can report a lot about the policies taking place in the background. We can talk to a lot of high level admin, but the people who really know what's happening are the folks on the ground. And those are those teachers.
Well, I think what you do a great job in the project of showing is not only that individual student's experience, but also some examples of where things are actually working to connect with some unexpected student populations where having those teachers with that cultural sensitivity are paying out a benefit, taking a solutions angle, if you will. How intentional was that for the project?
It was very intentional. I think the solutions aspect is so key to covering the speed of education because, we just don't want to highlight the challenges, but what's working, whether it's here within the state or elsewhere. As we know, cost of living and teacher recruitment and retention are subjects that hit hard in other areas like the Bay Area of California and, other coastal cities. So in this project, one solutions piece that I did focus on came from within the state. So I traveled to the island of Molokai, one of the most isolated and sort of economically challenged islands in the entire state of Hawaii. But what's interesting about that area is that their teacher retention levels were quite high. A majority of their teachers were staying 5 years or more at Molokai High School, that is. Now, this is sort of an outlier island in which development has been a little bit slower to encroach upon that island. It's not a place where many tourists go, nor are necessarily welcome for that matter, but it is a beautiful place and it's very rural. But anyhow, I traveled to Molokai and visited Molokai High School because I had heard just from a conversation I was having with someone that they do a great job of retaining teachers. So, what I learned by speaking to the principal there and some of those teachers was that many of them are homegrown. Many of them are from that community. Many of them grew up on Molokai or have spouses who grew up on Molokai. So, I try to use an example of that high school, for instance, to really illustrate the power of, and I emphasize local ties to the community and getting teachers to stay. What struck me about that visit and talking to those veteran teachers was that they know their kids. They know their kids' kids. They're teaching not only those students, but those students' as grandkids. It's just this large pipeline. And I think if you have that point of familiarity, like I said before, it just goes a long way to establishing trust. So, how does that help the student? They come to class more. They're less prone to be absent. They have more buy in. And while the school certainly faces its challenges with reaching test scores that are on par or higher than the state average, or graduation rates or college going rates, those metrics that we associate with student success, sometimes it just starts from the very beginning, like getting a student to want to come to school, learning that spirit of collaboration and a trust with an adult. So I think it's those building blocks that are really important and that when Molokai High School's teacher conversations helped me realize during that time.
It would be great to hear from you a couple of story ideas for other reporters who may be looking at teacher shortages and teacher workforce challenges in their own communities. What's an innovative angle you'd like to see some other reporters take?
I think every state is doing its own innovative thing when it comes to addressing the teacher shortage issue. But one thing that I was thinking that could be cool for reporters in other places to do is recognizing what's very unique about their own community. I'm lucky in that I cover a relatively small state with a very community-based news outlet, but I guess one thing that I would be interested in seeing is what do the communities in which teachers are teaching in look like? What's different about these communities? What's particularly unique as far as those sets of challenges or the student demographic that draws or attracts teachers to that community? And what can reporters do to sort of tap into that as a result? Another thing I was thinking is follow an innovative program that might have started about a year or 2 or 3 years ago and see where it's at now. For instance, Hawaii recently went on its first ever international recruitment trip to the Philippines to see if teachers in the Philippines might be willing to come teach in Hawaii, under a J1 visa, that lasts for up to 3 years. But in my research, I noticed that other states have been doing international teacher recruitment for quite some time. So if you're in one of those states, like Texas or others, who's been relying on international teachers for up to a few years, find out if it's working, see where it's at now. What do the students, parents, and families have to say about that kind of teaching style? What do those teachers who are recruited from abroad have to say about their experience? In education, there can be so many moving parts that we're always writing about new policies, but what about those policies that have been around for quite some time? What is or isn't working about them? I think following through is something that would be a great service to our readership.
Those are fantastic suggestions. And I think also something that might be interesting that somebody could take away from your reporting, not necessarily from you, but actually from the Hawaii Department of Education, is this idea of the listening sessions. I really love that. I think it'd be great for a reporter to try to set that up, not just as a way to source some new voices and some new faces, but to really hear from the folks who know what's happening. As you said, those are often the teachers.
Right. And as far as those listening sessions go, that was a DOE initiative to sort of collect data for this pay adequacy study that just came out several days ago. But it certainly was it was awesome for a reporter like me to sit in on, right? Because these are public meetings and you do get the unscripted, really oftentimes emotional stories of teachers recounting how challenging it is to be a teacher, to be in a profession that they do love and really value on a salary that just can't keep pace with the cost of living here. So, yeah, I think it really does go back to individual stories. I mean, everyone has their own story, everyone has their own journey of how they got to where they are. But to be a reporter in the room, just listening to that unscripted kind of dialogue is just great material and it's great insight into what propels teachers' interest here.
Suevon Lee covers Hawaii's public schools for Honolulu Civil Beat, and she joined us from her office there. Suevon, thank you for making time for EWA Radio.
Happy to do it, Emily. Thanks so much for having me on.
I did want to mention, again, Suevon was an EWA Reporting Fellow. We're looking for the next class of EWA Reporting Fellows. Suevon, would you recommend the program to them?
100%. Absolutely.
The deadline is Friday, March 6th. You can find out more information at ewa.org. And that wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you want to learn more about, drop us a line at radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thank you for listening.